but it's about prioritizing what's important. From where I sit, what's most important to me is the people out there actually delivering the service. I could not come to work for a week. Trains are still going to run. Buses are still going to run. Paratransit's still going to operate, right? It's not about me. It's about our frontline workers. It's about the folks operating the trains, operating the buses. And that's why I am out there as much as I can, because I want to make sure that they have what they need to succeed.
Welcome back to Spilling the Tea, the podcast that dives deep into the inner workings of the MBTA. I'm your host, Andrew Cassidy of the MBTA's Customer and Employee Experience Department. And today, we're exploring the core of the MBTA's operations and its cultural engine room with our guest, Ryan Coholan, the T's Chief Operating Officer. Today, we're going to explore the MBTA's workplace culture and the leadership approach that Ryan brings to the table. How do you maintain safety, reliability, and a sense of community in an organization as vast and diverse as the MBTA? Ryan's insights are about to give us some answers. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Ryan, what does the Chief Operating Officer for the MBTA do?
So as Chief Operating Officer, I'm responsible for all modes of operation and typically what goes into making them operate. So for example, I'm responsible for the light rail, the heavy rail, the commuter rail, the bus operations, ferry operations, and paratransit operations. What goes into those, right? Obviously, they have to be dispatched. So the OCC falls into my area. Vehicle maintenance, right? To keep them running falls into my area. Maintenance of way to keep the track and signals and power systems where they need to be. That all falls into my area. So I'm sort of a one-stop shop to operate a transit agency.
So what don't you do, I guess, is the better question.
So lots of the support functions. For example, if you want to come work for the MBTA, you have to go through HR. That is not me. The marketing groups, fare collections. I'm probably their biggest customer, but that's not me. Vehicle engineering. I'm without a doubt their biggest customer.
Yeah.
But that's not me.
You have an interesting background. So I'd like for you to share with us maybe the moment or experience that really initially sparked your passion for the world of transit and railroad.
Every child at some point has interest in trains, right? Whether it's 5 minutes or a lifetime. And I don't think that goes away. So there I was. I think at the time I was probably 12. And I went on the Cape Cod dinner train because, I was a kid that liked trains.
Yep.
And my parents brought me on that. And, I was nosy. I asked a lot of questions. I asked to go see the cab of the locomotive, like any reasonable boy would. And the engineer at the time, a guy named Ed Kelly, he said, sure, come on up. So I checked out the engine and I was like, this is great. Right. And, it was a casual conversation of, do you live locally? Yeah, I do live locally. He goes, well, if you ever want to go for a ride, just stop by. Okay, sure. I came back the next day and I rode the cab on the dinner train and the cab of the locomotive for the whole trip, 3-hour trip. And from that point, I sort of became a fixture. Fast forward to age 14. That entire time, I just kept coming back. I was that kid that was always hanging around, always asking questions. I got my work permit and I officially became part of the payroll of the railroad.
So 14 years old, you're already working on the railroad.
All the live long day.
There you go.
And, that transitioned into probably the best after school job. Every day after school, I'd go put tools away and I'd do the gross jobs that nobody wanted to do. Draining locomotive oil sumps, we call them. It's like a big oil change, 250 gallons worth. Pretty much every greasy, nasty job that any person who's interested in this is like, yeah, get me in there. Let me understand how this machine works. And I think from that point forward, every other interest in my life kind of became second, right? Second interest, third interest. But sometimes you just know that there are things you're supposed to do. And there are things that suit you as a person, right? Whether it's your approach, your opinion, or just what you want to do. and I knew I was there. The rest is history.
And where did you progress to from the 14-year-old Ryan?
From there, I stayed with it. Any moment I wasn't at school or doing something else, I was there. Age 18, on my 18th birthday, still in high school, I received my locomotive engineer's license.
Maybe you don't know right off the top of your head, but I'm sure that entire experience has clearly stuck with you for quite some time, and it's probably shaped you as an individual. So how do you think those early experiences in locomotives, how do you think that influenced your approach to leadership and operations at the MBTA?
I think that from a very early point, it taught me more about people. I mentioned Ed Kelly, because how easy would it have been for him to have been, you know what? No, sorry, can't come in the engine. There are folks who I still talk to all the time who are part of my very early days in this business. And it would have been very easy for them to say, beat it, kid. No more questions. You talk too much. Good luck doing whatever you're going to do. But these people didn't. These people sort of embraced me, and they became a second family. I think it speaks to the fact that no matter who you come in contact with in these jobs, there are people who want to be where you are. There are people who have a lot to offer the industry. So I think that it's important that we remember everything we do, how we conduct ourselves. People are watching. And sometimes they're people who aspire to be just like you.
Well said. Now, both internally and externally, the conversation around improving the MBTA often cites culture, safety culture, workplace culture, etc., as something that needs to be improved. Can you define what culture means in this context and how the MBTA is working to improve it?
Culture is a very unique term, right? I think it means different things to different people. Where the MBTA is today is a turning point, right? It is a different path forward driven by necessity. And I say that because all of us who have paid attention, I think we all agree that at whatever point in time things maybe started to go the wrong direction, I think a healthy culture would have raised a flag. A healthy culture would have pointed out the obvious. And I think for whatever reason, that culture wasn't where it had to be to empower people to say, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. I feel like we're going in the wrong direction. I think a healthy culture encourages people to raise that flag. And it goes beyond someone having the guts to call out a problem. I think that people need to know that it's okay to challenge what people are telling you is the norm. The way I see something, the way you see something, it's going to look different. And a healthy culture, I think in this business, has to empower people to speak their mind. And I don't mean in a challenging way or a confrontational way, but human beings typically know what's right and what's wrong. I think we all share that same feeling of when the hair on your neck stands up, like, maybe this doesn't feel right. We say, you know what? I think I want to hit pause for a minute and see what's going to happen. I want to study this a little bit more. Now, sometimes we study things over and above and well beyond where they need to be studied. We're an industry that is very slow to change, right? As evidenced by how we operate today. So I think a healthy culture needs to empower people to adapt. And when you're looking at a web like the MBTA, employees, equipment, the only reason we exist is to move people. If we're not moving people safely, effectively, we might as well just sell everything, right? We could have the longest bowling alley in the history. But one thing I do see about this culture is we're at a point in time where people are focused on doing better, on doing things differently, on transforming the culture of the MBTA to a culture that will help us build our story for what is to come, right? I know that's sort of a long answer, but I think we have the culture. I think we're seeing for the first time a culture that will drive us down the path we want to go, and that's to be better, to be a better agency, to be a better place to work, to be a better service to ride. I see the culture coming together. And look, it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be done. And I think that speaks to the beauty of this profession. Probably one of the biggest draws for me is this job is never done. Our work is never done as the MBTA. There is always a way to improve. we should never bring it to a point where we say, you know what, we've achieved our goal, we're done. Right? We should never do that. We should always want to do more. There's always a community that we could serve better. There's always equipment that we could maintain better. Our jobs are never done. And I think that's fascinating, right? Because a lot of work is very quantifiable, right? And you could break down what we do into very specific quantities: on-time performance, headway adherence, number of vehicles in service, right? Those are all very quantifiable things. But as we've talked about, there's much more to it than just numbers in trains. A lot of what I base our success on is people, external and internal.
Makes a lot of sense. It's just like we can never be perfect ourselves. If you're an organization made up of people, there's always that room for improvement. I think based on this conversation, it's clear that your career in transit is not just a career. It's really just, it's fully a calling, really. As you said, getting started so early on, maintaining it, and still having that same passion and belief in the work that we do here. But I guess my question is, leading an organization that is as complex as the MBTA, it does require a unique set of skills. So when it comes to fostering that positive workplace culture that you're talking about, what are some of the key principles that you adhere to?
I think that we need to make sure that as leaders in the MBTA, we need to really walk the walk. We need to set the standard, right? I'm a big fan of Gordon Ramsay. I like to cook. I've always clung to something he says often. It's your food, it's my standards. And I think that leaders within the MBTA need to be very thoughtful of how they set standards. Because as a leader in any organization, there are some people standing next to you. There are some people standing above you. But there will always be people looking up at you for guidance, support, direction. And I think that where we're at right now with our leadership coming in the door, I think as far as the level that I sit at, I think we're very direct on what our expectations are. And all that does is set people up for success. Right? If I can't give clear direction or set clear expectations, what am I doing? Right? We need to be clear. And sometimes being clear means an uncomfortable conversation. Maybe my position doesn't quite align with everyone else's, or maybe everyone else's mindset. And for the last 5 months, almost 6 months, there's been a lot of topics that I've broached that maybe, I don't want to say they've been controversial, but it's been a very different way of doing things. And it's based on my experiences. I could easily walk in, put an idea on the table and say, this is it. This is what we're doing. End of discussion. And sometimes, right, ask changes from an ask to a direction. But just because I know my way of doing things, I also am very aware that we are surrounded by people who have worked here for 10, 20, 30 plus years. And for me, it's very important to understand where we've been, right? How did the rules get to the way they are? Was it a series of Band-Aids or short-term cures that have just stuck for years? Was it a knee-jerk reaction to answer the crisis of the moment? It's important to make those decisions and give that direction appropriately. If I'm asking people to do something, you can rest assured I'm going to be doing it right there next to you. And I think that speaks to sort of my style. We talked a little bit about, styles or approaches. For better or worse, I am a hands-on leader. I take pride in the fact that I can drive my train home. I stay qualified. And over the years, I've learned that the best way to understand what's going on is to go see it for yourself. So I would rather take an extra hour off of the calendar, cancel a meeting, not show up and risk the fallout, but just put eyes on the situation and see what's going on.
You're someone who is known within the MBTA for finding solutions faster and using new technology to advance operations and maintenance. How or in what ways are you pushing the T forward so there are fewer issues that impact service?
I think I can answer the question if I tell, again, a quick story.
Oh boy.
I know I'm full of quick stories. But I think technology in this business, we talked a lot about, sort of holdover and the fact that we're slow to adapt. And why? Because look, over history, we typically end in a spot where what we have works. Take us back to steam engines, right? Steam locomotives were around for years and years and years and years. And they worked until one day a diesel locomotive showed up. And then that has lasted for, the better part of almost 100 years now. And the MBTA is on the cusp of electric technologies, battery technologies, and it's not just the MBTA, it's the industry as a whole. But I'll take us back to somewhere around 2016, 2017, I believe. Sometimes I get pulled into, what I call just cold called sales pitches, right? And I was sitting in a meeting with a group of folks who had been connected to railroad operations via a former general manager. And they said, look, just hear them out, see what they have. Maybe they have something that you might find useful. Okay. So I listened to a group of folks talk about machine learning and what equated to oil analytics. And, I'm listening to this whole sales pitch and like, okay, I want to listen to this, but I'm just not interested in a sales pitch. And then one individual started to talk about locomotives. And I'm like, okay, well, now you have my interest. Let's talk. And, probably 40 minutes goes by and we're talking about power assemblies and EMD 645 E3 engines, which is what the bulk of the commuter rail fleets are equipped with. And we're talking about like in the weeds, pistons, cylinders, like how the locomotive actually runs. And the sales pitch sort of goes away. And then this gentleman sticks around and we're just talking shop, talking about oil, about engine oil. And he represented a tool that I saw as revolutionary to how this industry operates. Locomotive engine oil. I said earlier, I used to change oil on locomotives, about 250 gallons worth of oil. Well, that oil can really tell a story. In the railroad industry, since internal combustion engines have been part of it, we've always done an oil analysis, at least once a year, sometimes more often, because you can learn a lot about what's going on inside that main engine through engine oil. It's sort of a molecular black box, right? Tells you an awful lot. It's just like, you have an annual physical, right? A week or two before you go get blood drawn. The blood kind of tells your doctor, maybe you shouldn't have too many donuts, right? It kind of tells a lot about what's going on inside. And locomotive engine oil does the same thing. And myself and this individual, we talked long and hard about how could we take an engine oil sample and analyze it beyond just putting it in a filing cabinet, right? And if I do it once every 6 months, what if I took an oil sample every 3 months? What if I took it every 10 days? And I start to layer these samples on top of each other, right? Now, for you or I'd be sitting there with a slide rule, a calculator, an abacus, trying to make all these things line up. But this gentleman had a computer program that would essentially take those values and now start to compare them. And not once a day, thousands of times a day. And it just kept looking for patterns. Because as we had a main engine failure, we would add that to the equation. And eventually, we got to a point where the system would say, if you have A, B, and C all going on at the same time, the likelihood of a main engine failure is high. And then with so much data going in, we were able to drill down to, if you have this much of A, this much of B, and this much of C for this long, you will probably have a main engine failure in about 21 days, right? It's like snake oil. You go, no way this is true. Until we had a turbocharger failure that fell exactly within the parameter that the software said it would be. And we were like, whoa, this is real. Crazy, and this is real. And so we were the first commuter railroad in the country to roll out a program like that. And to this day, we still do it. And that program doesn't just apply to old locomotives that you're trying to keep running, but, we are in the process of completing a locomotive overhaul on our F40 locomotives. And that same tool has certainly shown its value in holding suppliers accountable, right? New main engines, remanufactured main engines, and having that visibility into what's going on inside that main engine quickly tells you, how was it rebuilt? Was it rebuilt properly? Were the torque values right? Or is this new engine literally chewing itself up as it's running? And it's important for me to demonstrate the value to the Commonwealth that a program like this brings when you're talking about, rebuilding a locomotive, the better part of $3 million, right? That's taxpayer money. you use tools like this to ensure that the Commonwealth is getting the best value, that the taxpayer is getting the best value. And that equates to better performance, better service, less mechanical failures, and a better rider experience. So there is a home for technology. We've had a couple of issues with overhead catenary wire, on parts of the Green Line. And from my experience in, intercity passenger rail, Amtrak, high-speed rail, things like that, there are tools out there in the industry that will allow you to take, say, a photograph of a pantograph on a train. You take that picture, and now that train passes that same camera. It takes another picture, or maybe you have several up and down a rail line. But these machine learning systems will now take that picture and just layer it on top of the other one, on top of the other one, on top of the other one, and just start to analyze when things start to deviate, right? A human, you're going to give them a stack of pictures and say, you tell me which one isn't the same?
Yeah.
That's an exercise. That's a tough job. Have the machine do it. It's probably going to do it more frequently. It's probably going to do it more reliably because it's not worried about you trying to get out of work at 3:00 because you have a baseball game to go to or a football game. That machine will continue to look at this around the clock 24/7, and it can be trained to actually raise a flag, send an email to the mechanical desk and say, hey, this car 3817, you may want to shop that car because the pantograph's starting to look a little funny. And these are tools that are available. For whatever reason, they've never really caught on here at the MBTA, and certainly not to downplay the efforts of the workforce, but there's only so much the human eye can catch. And when that inspection is competing with the same time that you maybe have the meeting set up or the latest fire drill or whatever it may be, particularly in this business, would I rather have a machine 24/7 trying to find the problem before it manifests into a problem? Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of up and coming technologies that we're going to look at to really translate into a better MBTA experience.
I'm sure our riders will greatly appreciate that. You are a very visible leader. It seems everywhere I look, there you are. And it's everything from just being out in the system, interacting with employees as they're doing their jobs. I saw recently you were welcoming a class of new employees at the MBTA. There was even an instance recently where we were visited by some school children. You made it a point to be there. You are extremely connected, boots on the ground with our frontline employees and across the board, really. So what have you learned from these interactions, and how has what you've learned shaped your priorities as COO?
You said it. You see me all over the place throughout the course of the day. And, that's tough to do when you have agendas full of meetings after meeting after meeting. But it's about prioritizing what's important. From where I sit, what's most important to me is the people out there actually delivering the service. I cannot come to work for a week. Trains are still going to run. Buses are still going to run. Paratransit's still going to operate, right? It's not about me. It's about our frontline workers. It's about the folks operating the trains, operating the buses. And that's why I am out there as much as I can, because I want to make sure that they have what they need to succeed. The conversations I have in passing with a bus operator, a light rail operator, a heavy rail operator, a graduating class, or quite frankly, a group of elementary school kids who are thinking about a career at the MBTA or a career in transportation. I'm always learning from our current employees. What can I do here and now to make sure they have what they need to succeed? But for future employees, right? And maybe elementary school is a little young, but I mean, that same approach holds true for middle school, high school kids who go to a vocational school. I talk to a lot of people, and it allows me to better understand and hopefully get out ahead of what tomorrow's workforce needs. What are they looking for to get out of a career? And that's a unique approach, I think, particularly with transportation, because look, it is not a glamorous career. It is not IT. It's not medical. It's not something that is out there in the universe of, hey, come do this job. You'll make a lot of money. But it's necessary. It will always play a role in society. And the better I'm equipped, knowing what the feedback is from the front line or from prospective frontline employees or even middle management. I talk a lot about frontline, but we have a lot of super talented middle management folks who a 10-minute conversation gives me 3 or 4 ideas of how can we make this a better operation, a better organization. When I have an opportunity, I seize it, get out of the office, hop on a train. Yesterday, I had an hour and a half in between. I hopped in the green line right outside this building. I went for a ride out to Medford. I just looked out the window. I found some brush I want cut. I think that helps me understand what's going on out there, because that's really the experience, right? That's what
100%.
our passengers see. That's what our operators see. And again, like I said earlier, we exist to move people.
You speak a lot about empowering employees, and it seems to be a significant focus for you. Can you talk about how you equip your team and I guess the T as a whole with the tools they need to excel, and how you ensure that each member of the T really feels valued and supported in their role?
Goes back to expectations, right? I think that, I've experienced an MBTA where opinions are just that and you should keep them to yourself. I've experienced an MBTA where we purely manage by committee or manage by opinion. And sometimes some decisions are difficult to make. In order to empower people to make decisions, I think, number one, they need to feel safe. How do you make someone feel safe? In my position, I need to level set the field. Again, I talk about expectations. I need to set my expectations. And from there, I typically tell anyone who I work with, who leads a division or otherwise, I set my expectations. I make it clear that I am there to guide, support, sometimes direct. I don't like to direct. Quite frankly, if I'm making every decision, no matter what level it is, I'm just undermining someone else's ability, right? I'm taking away their ability to demonstrate their skill set, right? Their focus on the service. Once I empower my team, that empowerment trickles down. Last week, I did talk to a class of newly graduated heavy rail operators. I also spoke to a class of incoming light rail operators, spoke to a class of incoming bus operators. And one thing I've said to every group is, if you have a question, pick up the radio, right? Raise your hand, ask the question, ask it in here, ask it out on the road, right? Because by empowering you to know that you can ask that question and someone's not going to get mad at you about headway adherence, right? If that question prevents an injury, prevents an unsafe condition, that's what it's all about. It's not all about performance. It's easier to say we're a performance-driven operation. Well, that's great until something happens. And there's way more to performance than just achieving high percentages of on-time performance or headway adherence. And once you start to demonstrate across the board where your priorities lay, people pick up on that. And people, now are feeling like they know if they make a decision, I'm going to have their back. If they make the wrong decision, I'm still going to have their back. Because I think the most important part about empowering people to make decisions and do what's right is making sure that when they do have a question, you're available. That's what I'm here for. That's what a lot of the team is there for. In those moments of crisis and panic and someone's just looking for direction, you need to be there.
And, I think this all ties back to the cultural shift. And maybe it's not a shift, because I know you mentioned before that there's kind of an existing piece that was always there, but it definitely seems like you're kind of stoking the fires, empowering people so that maybe doing the right thing, maybe challenging themselves, maybe speaking their mind is something they were always interested in, but maybe now they feel they have the freedom to do so. Because there is that change. And, again, I know you're not one to take the credit for it, but I definitely see you as a champion for helping others grow and feel that they have the authority and autonomy to succeed or fail, but that you have their back. And I think that's extraordinarily important, especially at a place like the MBTA. I want to touch on something that you had mentioned earlier regarding safety. So obviously safety is paramount at the MBTA. It's kind of the foundation of everything we do. If we can't do anything else, we have to be safe, without question. You've mentioned a concept called safety always. Can you speak to that mindset and how you embed it across all different levels of the organization?
Yeah, I think that we as human beings take the word safety probably either out of context or certainly for granted. Here's a great example. I was at 45 High Street today before I came here. In order for me to get from 45 High Street to 10 Park Plaza, I navigated several crosswalks, across several streets, around cars, buses, people, animals. And I think that particularly in this industry, we take the sometimes cliche anecdote of safety first, right? And we only target that to posters in the workplace or campaigns or slogans, right? Safety first. What does that really mean, right? Is safety truly first? And if it is, again, what does that mean? Because I know for me to navigate my way from 45 High Street to 10 Park Plaza, I had to navigate many, safety risks without really acknowledging that they're safety risks, right? Rail transportation, coupling up two cars. Is there a safety risk being within that area? Absolutely. Do you think about it? Absolutely. Same safety risk exists crossing the street here in Boston? Absolutely. You just don't think about it that way, right? You treat it with a different context, but you really have to remain safe always. And it doesn't get the glitz of a poster in a car shop or a sign-up location, inward-facing campaign, safety first. But for you to even come to work and read that sign yourself, you've individually navigated so many risks and you don't even think about it, really. It just kind of happens because that means you're consciously aware that safety always, how many people as a kid caught their finger in a car door, right? I know I did.
Not just as a kid.
Yeah. Fair enough. So you weren't thinking safety always.
There we go.
No, but look, there are distractions around us 24/7, no matter what we do. And it's how you conduct yourself. That builds on the idea that it's safety always. Everyone, I think, has a desire to not get hurt. You don't want to step out in front of a piece of oncoming traffic at a crosswalk unless you have the light and the vehicle stopped. And just because you have the walk light, I typically look.
Same.
Right? They
Even on one ways.
Look, they're going to leave a big dent if they hit me. But, but I think that once you get programmed to think safety always, just how you navigate your day to day, I think that sets you up for success without you even knowing it.
So I have one last question for you.
Sure.
And it goes back to, I think this is kind of the wrap up of your holistic approach. I don't know if you see it as such, but in talking with you, that's how I've seen it. But you mentioned a concept before, and it was working yourself out of the job. And it's by building up, capable, knowledgeable workforce. How do you balance the day-to-day demands of the role with this long-term vision of working yourself out of the job?
I guess that is kind of a unique approach, right? But I think that I'll hang my hat on that is sort of my overall goal, to work myself out of a job. And whether it's life experience or otherwise, I am well aware that there is not a job in the world that anyone should ever take the approach of, what are they going to do? Fire me? They need me, right? Whether it's a bruise to someone's ego or otherwise, everyone, including myself, if Phil Eng was sitting here, he would say the same thing. Everybody is replaceable. And knowing that, right, and having lived life a little bit and, found myself in situations that maybe at some point I thought maybe I wasn't replaceable. Well, guess what? Right? Sometimes you are. And I think that, at least for me, right, as the person that I am, those experiences have taught me to set people up for success. Right? And that's what we talk about, working myself out of a job. But that doesn't mean I place a ceiling on them. It's not like I can sit here and say, I'm going to work them almost to the top, but then that's it because I don't want them to replace me. What a bizarre way to do things. And we've all been in situations where there are people that do that, right? They lead you 3/4 of the way. But once they feel maybe threatened, they quickly change their approach. No, I got this. You just keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to take this one. And I know personally, I don't really have the patience for that. Because if I am working with someone on my team who is knocking it out of the park, right? They should be the ones who are, getting the accolades, getting the praise. Shouldn't be me. And a big part about humility, right, is sometimes when your team is knocking every ball out of the park, right? Are you going to stand there in front of them and block them? I don't think you are. You shouldn't. And if you think that you have to, I will tell you that the job as COO for the MBTA is probably not the job for you. I know that one day this is going to be someone who takes what I've inherited or what I've done and they take it their own direction. And you know what? They'll probably do it better than me. But it's not about me. It's about the MBTA. And that sounds so cliche.
No, I'm with you.
But it's not. It's not. Because again, I go back to what I said earlier. If you love what you do, these jobs are not hard. If you're passionate about the mission and you believe in the mission and you believe in the purpose, everything else will come together. Because sometimes you can be your own worst enemy. You do a job, you do it halfway, you don't take the pride in it, and it reflects poorly on you. But in this business, we need to understand that what we do carries a tremendous responsibility. It doesn't matter if you're a station porter, a motor person, a train dispatcher, a bus dispatcher. Pick a job. Everything you do touches people. These jobs within the MBTA have monumental responsibility. And I've said it to new classes of recent graduated heavy rail persons. If right here and now you decide that you're not up to handle that level of responsibility, I will not think less of you. Raise your hand, gather your stuff, and leave. If you are not committed to this and to yourself, I am not going to think less of you. But if you go out there and you accept this challenge, you accept this responsibility, I expect you to own it. I'll share this just because I think it's important to talk about just sort of the progression through the career. We talk about watching other people succeed in this business. I'm going to take us back to, let me see, I want to say it was around 1997, late 97. At the time, I worked for a company, Cape Cod Railroad. They were part of a regional short line railroad, Bay Colony Railroad. They operated a tourist passenger type service. And now there used to be an event called the Bourne Scallop Festival in the town of Bourne, right by the Cape Cod Canal. And they would have a big fair, carnival rides, all of it. But the whole thing was you go there and you eat scallops. And there was a parking issue there for years. There was just no parking in Buzzards Bay. So the railroad said, well, we can run a shuttle train. So they worked out an agreement with the town of Wareham, and the railroad said, we'll operate a shuttle back and forth. And we had a couple of unique pieces of equipment, but we had what's known as a Bud car, a rail diesel car, RDC. And it's a self-propelled passenger car. It's got 2 6-cylinder diesel engines under it, direct drive transmissions. So you can operate one car on its own or 6 or 7 cars coupled together. So for that service between Wareham and Buzzards Bay, I took one of those jobs and I ran a single Bud car between Buzzards Bay and Wareham, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I don't know, probably did 30 round trips. But when I would arrive in Wareham, probably for the first 3 or 4 arrivals, there was a kid standing on the platform, just watch me arrive and then leave. And then, 45 minutes later, I'd come back, he would still be there. And, I thought back to the folks who, sort of fueled my curiosity. And in the railroad world, everyone, conductors, engineers, they carry what we call a grip. And that's a bag that has your rule books in it, some basic supplies, stuff that you're supposed to have with you while you're on duty. And there was just an issuance of a new rule book. So I still had the old rule book in my bag. And I remember turning the train in Wareham, going to the other end to get ready to go back to Buzzards Bay. And I had that old rule book and I gave it to the kid. And I said, look, if you're interested, right, obviously hold on to this. And when you turn 18, come see me.
Yeah.
Right. And well, lo and behold, he turns 18. He comes knocking on the door. We hire him, put him through training, becomes a conductor. Oddly enough, he was my conductor on a lot of trains. He promotes up to engineer, goes through that training. And then one day he decides he's going to come to work for the commuter rail. And I'm still doing my thing in the Cape and we stay in touch. And you fast forward to a couple of years ago. So locomotive engineers every 3 years have to do a full recertification. And this gentleman, he had progressed through the ranks of the commuter rail operation, where I find myself in my locomotive engineers class on the commuter rail side as a student of the same guy.
Wow.
And, it was always sort of a running joke of how the tables have turned, right? I was there, we call it a DSLE, a Designated Supervisor of Locomotive Engineers. I was the person who signed off on his engineer's license, many years prior. And now I'm sitting there at the time as the Chief Railroad Officer, knowing that he is someone who is going to have to sign off on my license. And I think that we every day have opportunities in this industry to do the same thing, to open that door for somebody who wants in. And I encourage everybody, take that opportunity. Someone has a question, take the 30 seconds and answer it. And if you don't know the answer, tell them that you're going to follow up with them. You'll get them the answer, because I guarantee you that same kid who's standing on the platform at Wonderland, right? And they have a question, you don't know the answer, they'll be there tomorrow. They'll be there the next day. You'll see them again, right? Imagine their world if you come back and say, hey, I got that answer, right? I talked to the mechanical people and this is what they said. And maybe you've opened the door for somebody.
An incredible story.
It's pretty great.
Ryan, thank you so much for joining us here today. This has been extremely fascinating. It's been great to hear about your story, your leadership style, and really just kind of the direction for the MBTA. So thank you again.
No, thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
As we come to a close, I want to extend a big thank you to our guest, Ryan Coholan, for sharing his insights, stories, and vision for the future of the MBTA. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Spilling the Tea. We hope you leave today's episode feeling informed and inspired. For a continued look behind the scenes of the MBTA, be sure to subscribe to Spilling the Tea on your favorite podcast platform and send your questions and episode ideas to social@mbta.com. We look forward to having you join us again, and we continue to explore the people, the stories, and the passion that keeps Boston moving.